I am not a stepfather. I have multiple children, all born to the same woman, all in wedlock. But that doesn't mean that, in an alternate universe scenario, that I would be against being a stepfather. So from this healthy and prosperous position of personal success devoid of familial dysfunction, I can express this opinion from a place of purity in my heart. There actually is a context in which it is perfectly respectable and genuinely noble to become a stepfather. A context in which a man is neither a fool nor a simp. Allow me to explain what that is. Modern men are, in general, correct in their reasoning for why they'd not date a modern single mother in most scenarios. However, there is something ancient about unity that gets lost in the modern debate about single mothers and men who won't step up. A figurative baby thrown out with bathwater. In ancient times, men didn't just protect their own children, they protected the children of their entire village. But the context for why they may have done it then is different than the context for why they may do it now, as times have changed. First world societies are no longer as homogeneous and unified as they were in earlier times. In ancient times, if a father fell in war or to disease, another man would step forward not out of romance or desire, but out of duty. Usually, it would be for his brother or closest friend, not even necessarily out of desperate desire for any woman, but as an act of honor for his friend and an expectation of his tribe. Because when one village's child went unfathered and untrained, it weakened the next generation of warriors, much as a weak link would in a phalanx. All it takes is one vulnerability to make the entire formation crumble. All it would take is one vulnerability in a castle or any other similar concept thereabouts, such as to reveal a hidden passageway to an invading enemy that a bitter, confused, fatherless boy could have been easily manipulated into revealing. In that respect, the kind of man who would refuse to help the orphaned children of his neighbor wasn't just seen as selfish, he was seen as a liability. Because when those fatherless boys grew into men without guidance, it was his perimeter that would fail first when the enemy came. His refusal to care would return to him and to the rest of his village in the form of some manifestation of loss, either in the form of martial incompetence or flat-out betrayal, because the boy in question simply wouldn't feel the same sense of tribal loyalty, and why would he? Take, for example, the recruitment into the enemy's army, as the enemy could offer a substitute for fatherly warmth. If nobody from a given village sees the value and potential in their fatherless children, trust that an enemy from a different village would. That's a part of masculinity we've been losing along the way, becoming a multicultural society. The connection between personal responsibility and collective survival. Today, single mothers often say that men aren't stepping up, and they are correct in one way. But the deeper question isn't why won't men step up? It's in what context would it even make sense for a modern man to? Being a stepfather only makes evolutionary sense in the context of a shared tribe. So the question therein becomes how one defines their tribe. How does one define their tribe? The question of when it is an optimally respectable circumstance to become a stepfather in modern day first starts with a man's definition of his tribe. From a bird's eye view, clinical evidence indicates that multicultural societies tend to be low in trust, while monocultural societies tend to be high in trust. Robert D. Putnam says, quote, "In colloquial language, people living in ethnically diverse settings appear to hunker down, that is, to pull in like a turtle." Alberto Alesina and Eliana Leferrara say, quote, "Using individual level data, we find that the strongest factors associated with low trust are," and they list several things, but number 4 is living in a racially mixed community and or in one with a high degree of income disparity. Then Peter Thisted Dinesen and Merlin Schaefer and Kim Manamor Sonderskov say, quote, "We find a statistically significant negative relationship between ethnic diversity and social trust across all studies. The relationship is stronger for trust in neighbors and when studied in more local context. However, The ground view shows that exceptions to the general rule do exist in specific cases that are heavily contextual. For instance, in the military, a man can bond quickly with another man from a totally different ethnic background if they endure the suffering of training in war together. Moskos says, quote, "The American military has achieved a level of racial integration unmatched by any other major institution in society." King says, quote, "Cohesion does not derive from ethnic or cultural similarity, but from shared experience, professionalism, and mutual reliance under stress." Manning says, quote, "Unit cohesion depends not on sameness of background, but on shared hardship, common purpose, and confidence in each other's competence." In ancient times, tribe experienced a bit of both, cultural homogeneity and enduring hardships and war together, bonding despite whatever individual differences they may have had. In the ancient world, unless you were someone like a Norseman going on a distant voyage, a man's dating pool and his village were generally the same if village matchmakers didn't prearrange unions, to the extent that incest became a genuine concern in various contexts at various points in history. A man fought beside the men who might one day raise his children if he fell. He dined beside the women whose children he may have to one day protect. Now, however, the modern man doesn't even know his neighbors. He lives in a globalized village where everyone is connected online but belongs nowhere in particular. Most often, his wars are fought overseas by strangers in uniforms he'll never wear, while women have been forced to evolutionarily adapt to whatever the safest cultural direction may be, a factual aspect of estrogen in contrast with the effects of testosterone. When women believe that globalism is the prevailing norm, it makes sense why so many would fail to understand why the tribal bonds aren't there in the majority of scenarios for men to want to take on a stepchild. Meanwhile, the men who are higher in testosterone and those who become generally the most attractive males in the majority of social scenarios are more likely to stand against the concept of globalism, or at least have it more within themselves to do so, as their heightened sense of territory compels them to define their tribe more narrowly or distinctly. Thus, the feeling of shared identity that once made men step up has dissolved. And that's before we even get into the talk about the declining respectability of many modern women as quote-unquote fair virgin maidens become rarer and more narcissistic with every generation. Nowadays, a man is often mocked by other men for becoming a stepfather, as single mothers are considered declining investments of romance and character. However, men's instincts to provide and protect others besides those in their own homes haven't vanished. They've merely withdrawn. And the tragedy is, women fill this void too. Many still appeal to a man's honor, or at least they attempt to, trying to awaken it through guilt. They say things like, "A real man would step up." But it is generally the weaker males with lower testosterone levels who are more susceptible to the manipulative tactics of women who say things like, "A real man would do X," or "A real man would do Y." Because if you were to juxtapose the contrapositional logic in reverse by saying a real woman would X or a real woman would do Y, he would be met with aggression from most women in most scenarios, shaming him out of telling women what a woman should be or should do. So that's a cultural double standard that men with higher testosterone levels would be far more likely to call out, while resisting the notion of subservience to women, especially to women he didn't deem as members of his own respective tribe. So therein lies the rub. Modern women generally do not see themselves through the same eyes as the men they want, and guilting those men only works when there's an actual bond of trust combined with the vulnerability in the man's self-esteem tied to his collective survival instincts. In the past, a man and his tribe were more likely to survive if he became a stepfather, especially if the children were boys and the family wasn't destitute and could live off the land. Therefore, appealing to a man's sense of honor and survival in a feudal world made sense at the time. It was a matter of honor because the action was considered respectable among his tribe. It increased collective survival, so long as each child could integrate into a family trait of some kind, as there was no modern state system to systematically raise those children to develop a specific kind of cultural character. Guilt worked, at least then, because it wasn't guilt, it was shame, and shame was communal. If your neighbor saw you fail to defend a widow and her children, you weren't merely shamed as an individual, you weakened your father's name, your clans, and your gods. You brought dishonor to yourself before your ancestors. There's no hiding from that. Nowadays, however, With the evolutionary direction capitalism has taken with how the public school systems produce employees en masse instead of entrepreneurial families, a man is much more likely to go homeless the more children he has. Children have always been viewed as more burdensome than as gifts to parents who would fail to think of how to boost their family's income with each child in an ethical way. This effect, however, is reversed in families like mine that are based on the ancient style of family businesses. Each child has the potential to become an asset to any one or multiple family businesses that are owned by the same family name. Each child actually ends up expanding the family business as an extra hand in accordance with the law as they learn generational skills and become of working age. But in general, we live in nations so vast now that a man can disappear into almost any crowd. He feels no eyes watching him, no God's whispering judgment, no ancestral gaze from the mountain. Unless we're talking about Big Brother, that's a different contextual literality. When it comes to women, though, a man with higher testosterone levels generally keeps scrolling. He swipes away from her profile. He moves on, seeking a woman worth it to him to develop children with, not bearing another man's burden as a matter of a woman's sexual competitiveness. A woman with children generally has lower sexual market value than a woman without. But that mentality changes the moment the context of how he defines his tribe changes. For example, I have a childhood friend that I have known for approximately 30 years as of this writing. 30 years he's been my best friend. We met when we were only 8 years old in the same grade and we remain friends to this very day. He can be thousands of miles away from me, yet I consider him a member of my tribe. If he died and left behind a child, he can rest assured that I wouldn't let that child fall by the wayside. Doug, you know who you are. Not even because I had any thought about his woman, but simply because I'd honor him. I wouldn't even require any sex from his widow, as I am already married. My brother's woman wouldn't even be a variable in the equation of my decision to become a stepfather to his child. That mentality isn't even about women. It's about not wanting to see my brother's house fall. And this is when mentoring programs begin to make sense, when a man doesn't want the other homes of his people, of his community, to fall. Perhaps the fathers of each home were not as close as lifelong brothers, but there was still a sense of collective tribe between them. This is how we define communities. So, in conclusion, there is indeed a correct context, modern day, in which there is no shame for a man to be a stepfather. The correct context in which a man should become a stepfather is when the question is not about any woman's sexual market value, but the love he has for his brother and the drive he has to prevent his brother's house from falling. So if a woman wants to find a suitable stepfather for her children, she should first review and calibrate her definition of tribe and appeal to those specific men on that basis.